Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,200 likes on this one. I think if everybody took just a quick second, we could get there. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. We are only about 200 subscribers away from hitting 130,000. So if you want to help me hit that before the end of the year, I'd really appreciate that as well. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad right after this intro. There won't be any more ads after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I worked at the post office 2 weeks ago. That's not a euphemism, and it's not meant to sound mysterious. I've been there since I was 21, sorting, scanning, moving things from one place to another so other people can forget about them. It's stable work, quiet work, the kind of job where nothing interesting is supposed to happen. Every year around mid-November, I get rotated into a seasonal role. Officially, I'm assigned to the no response division. Unofficially, I'm the person who sorts the letters addressed to Santa that will never receive an answer. Most people don't realize how many of those come in. Kids still write physical letters. Parents still encourage it. Schools still make it an activity. By the time those envelopes reach us, they're already dead ends. Addresses that don't exist, names that aren't real, return labels written in blocky pencil handwriting. The machinery flags them automatically. They get pulled before routing and dropped into our department. We don't respond to them. We don't forward them to charities. We don't read them in full. That last part is the rule. It's been a rule since the late 90s, according to my supervisor. Long before I started, long before she did. The explanation they gave during training is simple and rehearsed. Children sometimes write about personal matters in their letters, family issues, home situations. It's not our place to read private information that was not meant for us. So we skim. We confirm it's addressed to Santa, stamp it as no response, log it, and file it away. You're allowed to read the opening line, maybe two. You're not allowed to finish it, ever. People joke about it the first year. They think it's superstition or some old HR leftover nobody bothered to remove. Somebody always asks what happens if you do finish one. The supervisor never answers directly. She just says it results in immediate termination. I believe that was all it meant for a long time. I stopped finding the rule funny 3 Christmases ago. That was when I learned what happens after termination. It's a tight-knit secret among the people who get roped into it, and you're only told after everyone thinks they won't say anything to anyone. They don't escort you out with security. They don't make a scene. You're just told to gather your things and leave the building. Your credentials are deactivated sometime later that day. Your access to internal systems disappears. To everyone else, it looks like you quit or got fired for something mundane. What happens next isn't in any handbook. It starts the same way every time. Within a day or two, the person mentions they feel watched. Maybe they laughed off at first and blamed stress. Then they describe something taller than it should be, standing too far away to make sense. A shape, a silhouette that doesn't move when they move. By the 4th or 5th day, they stop laughing. They all describe it the same way. A black figure, at least 12 feet tall, proportioned wrong, hands stretched to its shins, standing upright like it's pretending to be human. It wears a Santa hat, a real one, red, white trim, cheap felt. The hat never changes. It never falls. It never reacts to weather. It doesn't chase them. It doesn't speak. Every day it's a little closer. It can stand across the streets, at the end of a grocery aisle, on a sidewalk in full daylight. Other people walk through it like it isn't there. Nobody notices it. Nobody reacts. That's how they know it's meant only for them. The stalking lasts 12 days. On the 13th, they die. The post office doesn't acknowledge the connection. Officially, those people suffer unrelated accidents or medical emergencies. Unofficially, nobody in no response breaks the rule anymore. Except I did, because some of the letters aren't normal. Every once in a while, rare but often enough that we dread it, you find a crumpled envelope sealed with red wax instead of glue. No postage, no return address, just a name written carefully in pencil, as if the writer didn't want to risk spelling it wrong. Those letters are the reason the rule exists. We're meant to set them aside in a locked drawer and alert supervision immediately. No logging, no scanning. They are taken at the end of the month. Every single one of them is addressed to Santa. I'd seen 11 in my entire career before last week. The 12th had my nephew's name on it. Same first name, same last name. Even the way the pencil curved on the first letter looked wrong in a familiar way. My brother has a 7-year-old son. He writes his name the same way on birthday cards. Too big at the front, trailing smaller letters like he gets tired halfway through. I didn't open it right away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the seal, telling myself coincidences happen and kids share names. I told myself that red wax meant nothing, that plenty of children have uncles who work at the post office. I used a sick day and left immediately and drove straight to my brother's house. He laughed when I told him the envelope, told me I was overthinking it, said his kid probably found his wax stamp he used for work, and wanted to be fancy. When I asked if his son had written a letter to Santa recently, his smile faded just a little. He said yes, but he didn't see anything alarming, just the usual stuff. Toys, candy, video games. He asked why I cared so much. I didn't have an answer that didn't sound insane. That night, I dreamed about the drawer at work. It was open, and the letter was gone. The next morning, I broke the rule. I told myself I'd only read enough to confirm it wasn't really his. I told myself I'd stop if it got personal. I told myself I wouldn't finish it. I was wrong. The letter was written in pencil, neat but deliberate. No spelling mistakes, no childish phrasing. It thanked Santa. It thanked him for the last gift, not for toys or games, but for a piece of candy that had made Mommy stop crying. It said Santa had been right, that doing the bad thing worked, and nobody knew. It promised that this time would be even better, that stealing wouldn't be enough, and hurting animals felt too small now that he understood what Santa really wanted. It listed sins like chores. It ended by asking what Santa wanted next, because Christmas was coming and he wanted to be a good boy. I don't remember putting the letter down. I only remember my supervisor standing behind me, telling me to hand over my badge. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She looked tired, like she'd seen this exact situation before and hated it every time. She told me I was terminated for violating confidentiality policy, and that I needed to leave the building immediately. She didn't warn me about anything else. I didn't leave work right away. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour with the letter in my lap. I kept expecting someone to knock on the window and tell me this had gone far enough, that whatever point they were trying to make had landed, and I could come back inside. No one did. People clocked out as time went on, walked past my car without looking twice. I drove to my brother's house because there wasn't anywhere else it made sense to go. He answered the door with his son still awake behind him, cartoon voices echoing down the hallway. The normalcy of it. made what I was holding feel obscene, like I'd brought something diseased into a clean room. I asked if we could talk privately. He hesitated, then stepped outside with me, shutting the door behind him. Why are you holding Lucas's letter? We were standing on the porch. The light above us flickered every few seconds. I hadn't noticed it doing that before. It came to my work, I said. I need you to read it. You open my kid's mail? Yes, but you'll understand when you open it. That made it worse somehow. He took the envelope from my hand and turned it over, frowning at the wax seal. What is this? Some kind of joke? Seriously, read it. He broke the seal with his thumb and started scanning the page. I watched his eyes move, line by line. When he stopped, he stared at the paper like he'd lost his place. This isn't funny, he said. I know. He folded the letter once. Did you write this? No. Did you put him up to this? No. You really expect me to believe this came from a real... He stopped himself, laughed once, sharp and humorless. You can't be serious, Matt. I got fired today. I wouldn't risk my job for something like this. That doesn't help. I tried not to read it. I wasn't supposed to. But when I saw his name... You're talking about rules again, he said. That stupid Santa rule you're always on about this time of year. It's not stupid, I said. It's a thing for a reason. So now my son is the reason? His voice was louder now. Behind him, the TV laughed on cue. You think my son is hurting people? No, I said quickly. I think someone is asking him to. He stared at me, waiting for a grin that didn't come. You're sick, man, he said finally after staring daggers at me. It's been happening to other people. Co-workers. Once you finish one of these letters I took... This is enough. You don't get to come into my house and say ridiculous stuff like this. Just listen to me. Just for once, can you... You need help, Matt? Seriously, you're crazy. There's a thing. My voice dropped without me meaning it to. It starts watching you. Tall. Wears a Santa hat. 12 days and then... Get out. Don't talk about my son like that. Don't talk to me unless you get your stuff together. I'm not talking about him, I said. I'm talking about what's coming. He opened the door behind him. Stay out of my house, and don't come back until you can admit you made this up. But Christmas. Don't, he said. Do not bring that BS into my home. I stepped back further onto the porch. He didn't hesitate before closing the door. The lock clicked. Behind the door, my nephew laughed at something on the TV. In the silence that followed, the flickering porch light finally went out. At the end of the street, something tall stood perfectly still, waiting. I left my brother's house, not taking my eyes off of it. When I got home, it stood across the street from my apartment, partially hidden by a lamppost that only reached its upper thigh. The Santa hat sat perfectly on its head, bright red against a body that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. I didn't see it move. I watched from my living room window until my eyes started to hurt, until my reflection layered itself over the dark glass and made me doubt the shape even existed. When I looked away and looked back again, it was still at the end of the street, standing just past the stop sign. Cars drove past it without slowing. Headlights cut through its legs and came out the other side unchanged. A woman jogged directly through the space it occupied. Earbuds in, breath fogging in the cold air. She never noticed the height of the thing she'd passed. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I wanted to know if it would approach while I slept, if it only moved when I wasn't looking. It didn't move. The Santa hat was the brightest thing on the street. On the second day, it was closer. It stood across from my building beneath a street lamp. The light didn't reveal anything, only traced its outline like something pasted onto the world. I left early, before sunrise, telling myself that if I passed it quickly enough, I could prove it couldn't interact with me. As I walked by, I felt pressure behind my eyes, like I was remembering something I'd forgotten. It lasted less than a second. When I turned, it was still behind me. That night, I dreamed of red wax softening in my hands. On the third day, it was in the parking lot. It stood between my car and the exit. I walked around it without stopping. I remember feeling angry more than afraid. Angry that it was allowed to exist like this, violating the basic rules of proximity and consequence. A man leaned against my car to tie his shoe. His shoulder passed through its leg without comment. For a moment, by habit, I drove toward the post office before remembering I no longer worked there. On the fourth day, it began appearing indoors. I saw it at the end of the frozen food aisle, its head nearly brushing the hanging signs. People pushed carts through it. A child ran past me laughing when the cold air hit their face. I left my groceries and walked out. That night, Christmas music started to feel like a warning. On the fifth day, it followed me to my brother's street. It stood on the sidewalk in front of his porch, feet almost touching the step. I watched my brother walk through that space later, holding his son's hand. Not slowing, not noticing. The porch light turned on. The door closed. The thing didn't leave. On the sixth day, I stopped trying to explain. I called the non-emergency line, a therapist, anyone who might give this a shape that wasn't fatal. I talked about stress, unemployment, anxiety. Everyone heard exactly what they needed to hear. That night, it stood at the edge of my building's lot, closer than before. I closed the curtains for the first time and still woke up convinced something brushed the walls. On the seventh day, it was in the elevator to my apartment. The doors opened and it was already there, folded just enough to fit. A woman stepped in beside me and leaned against its leg without realizing it, frowning slightly at the unexpected cold. I got off 2 floors early. The rest of the ride creaked like it was carrying more weight than it should. On the 8th day, it appeared in reflections first, in the dark screen of my phone, in the microwave door, always behind me. When I turned, it was in the room where it needed to be to remain just out of reach. I never heard it breathe. On the 9th day, it stopped giving me space. I turned corners and almost walked into it. I started holding my hands out in front of me, afraid of colliding with it like misplaced furniture. That night, it stood at the front of my bed and leaned forward just enough to make the Santa hat dip. I didn't sleep. On the 10th day, I tried to leave the city. I drove until the roads thinned and the lights fell away. I locked myself in a rest stop bathroom just to breathe. It waited by the sinks. I turned around and went home. On the 11th day, it no longer followed me. It waited in places before I arrived, positioned where it made sense, as if it had always been a part of the layout. If it has eyes, I never saw them. If it has a face, I don't think I would survive seeing it. On the 12th day, it stood in my bedroom. Not at the foot of the bed. Closer. It bent at the waist until its head filled my vision. I smelled wax. I smelled paper. The Santa hat slid forward just enough that I thought I might finally see what was underneath. Then it folded itself back into the corner, impossibly small, and waited with me until morning. Tomorrow is the 13th day. He's standing just a few feet in front of me now. I'm going to die tomorrow night. I need help. Anything. Please. Most of the time when you hear about weird kids eating weird things, it's stuff like paste, not silica gel packets. But growing up, that's exactly what my childhood best friend Ellis would do each day. I still remember the day that we first met in grade 1. I was sitting out in the schoolyard during recess, on the one day that my mom forgot to pack me a snack. Ellis saw me without anything to eat and, without me even asking for anything, handed me a packet of salted pretzels. I smiled awkwardly, stuffed it in the bottom of my school bag, and then told him apologetically that I don't like pretzels. We both started laughing, and the friendship grew from there. Ellis shared a lot of interests with me, in that we were both geeky and bookish types who loved sci-fi movies and fantasy novels. We would spend hours talking with each other about our favorite fictional characters. You know, the packet says not to eat those, I told him gingerly one lunchtime, as he munched away on the moisture-absorbing silica crystals. I pointed to the print, saying, "Warning, do not eat," on one of the synthetic sachets, which were included in most snack packaging. "It's fine," he said, tipping the sachet back into his mouth. "It's actually harmless. They only put that 'cause it's a choking hazard, and I know how to chew." Unfortunately for Ellis, his unconventional snacking habit didn't go unnoticed in our grade. It didn't take for long for other students to notice him eating the silica gel packets and begin making up taunts and jeers about him. "Ew, he's eating that gross white powder stuff," laughed one bully, standing over poor Ellis. "What a freak." "Yeah, Martian boy, do they get gel packets back on your home planet?" A girl laughed, waving her hand in front of his glasses. "I made some science chemicals in the chem lab today. You should drink those too, nerd," jeered another bully, gawping at the discarded preservative sachet. This continued over the years of our friendship, befalling Ellis several times a week. They would come over and start giving him hell the second they saw one of those small blue gel packets being pulled out a lunchbox. Ellis was also much nerdier looking than myself, with thick glasses and a wispy frame, which further added to him being targeted. But despite all of this abuse, Ellis wasn't swayed from his maligned habit. He kept eating those silica gel pouches, chewing them more anxiously, scarfing them down before the bullies saw, or consuming them secretly in the bathroom. Each time that the bullies came over to degrade my best friend, I would avert my gaze, make myself quiet, and try not to attract their attention as they laid into Ellis. It was clear from my behavior that I was embarrassed by my friend's eating quirk. I didn't want to look too weird, or get targeted by association, so I would never defend Ellis or get involved, even when the bullying turned from verbal to physical. While I never outright deserted my friend or joined the bullies against him, I never stood up for him. At the time, I figured it was his habit, his battle to fight. This is something that I came to regret as I grew older. It tormented me, knowing I'd let a good friend suffer out of selfishness. I tossed and turned on some nights, kept up late thinking of all the comebacks I wish I'd said to the bullies in Ellis's defense. One childhood too late. Ellis and I matriculated together from elementary school into middle school, but it was high school where we parted ways, with me going to one and him to another. We said fond goodbyes to each other and promised to keep hanging out outside of school, but that promise didn't pan out as I was swept up in high school life. It would be years later, when I was well into my 20s, that Ellis finally returned to my mind. In the middle of watching TV in my apartment one evening, a news report came on that instantly cast my thoughts back to my old friend. And of course it did. It was about silica gel packets. They were being discontinued. Specifically, the brand that had been in all our snacks and treats throughout our school days which is why it was the only brand of silica that Ellis had eaten. According to the news report, the brand, Crystal, were being discontinued due to severely toxic substances present in them. The news reporter's words chilled me to my core. They're a simple part of food packaging designed to keep our food dry, but the question is, are they truly safe? Not those from this local producer of them. It is being alleged that Crystal silica gel packets were created with scientific waste products, which were not thoroughly understood by researchers at the time. Fortunately, food stored with the packets were protected from this substance by the plastic packaging. It is also not harmful in trace quantities. However, we urge anyone who has accidentally consumed this silica gel and is experiencing health issues to contact 9 News. Switching off the TV, my blood ran cold for Ellis. That surely didn't bode well for his health. That poor kid had eaten several of those sachets every day for his entire childhood. If they were worried about someone eating an odd packet here and there, what would all that do to him? After all, those sachets were allegedly made from discarded waste products, a byproduct of scientific studying crystallization. Apparently those crystals had vastly more absorbency than normal silica crystals, which is why the company used them to cut corners. But there had to be a trade-off somewhere. A terribly sad thought dawned on me as I wondered if my old friend was even still alive. He could have died from this poisoning during the 15 years since I'd seen him, and I'd have no idea. Pulling out my phone, I gave him a quick search on Facebook, and there was his profile. Well populated with few friends, his page looked like it had at least some activity until earlier this year. The most ominous thing, though, is that there were no profile pictures of him on the page. Instead, he just used various fictional characters' pictures. His current profile picture, a picture of the Wampa ice monster from Star Wars, and he'd updated that just a few weeks ago. Well, at least his love for geeky movies hasn't changed. I went to bed that night reassuring myself that my old friend was probably fine, and that if he was dead, he wouldn't be updating anything on Facebook. I still couldn't bring myself to reach out to him, but was content knowing he was likely fine. Still, those same nightmares of regret over failing to stick up for him returned to me that night. I saw those same bullies, and was silent as they ripped into him over his habit, one which I know may have cost him his health. However, my torment wouldn't stay confined to nightmares for long. The following Monday, I was leaving my office and getting in my car. Just when I was about to shut my door, I caught a glimpse of something over by a pillar in the car park. Something shiny and jagged, like crystals, like an entire body of crystals. I spun my head around to get a closer look, but it had already ducked back behind the pillar. Right then probably would have been the best time for me to investigate what I saw, but instead I dismissed the strange sight as a passerby's reflection in a chrome car, and pulled out of the parking lot. I didn't see the crystal creature in my workplace parking lot again, but this didn't bring me comfort because, instead, I now started seeing it on my various car rides back home. First on the street outside my office building, then at the intersection further down the road, then at the bus stop past the intersection, then in an alley further into my route. I never saw it for more than a few seconds in the evening dark, but it was unmistakable now. There existed some kind of stealthy humanoid creature, completely encased in sharp crystals, and even worse, day by day, it was following me home. I had only seen that glint of synthetic crystalline substance in one place before, but I'd seen it every day for years, and that was in the silica gel packets Ellis would dig into daily. I could put 2 and 2 together, the news report about my friend's crystal snack being toxic, and the strange crystal monster stalking me. Again, I jumped online at home and started looking old schoolmates up, but this time, instead of Ellis, it was the names of the kids who had bullied him. Their little gang had been made up of about 5 people, and it only now occurred to me that I hadn't heard anything concerning them for years. Searching each of their names, I was shocked to see obituaries. Roy, the leader, had been butchered in his sleep in an unsolved home invasion. Shauna, another of the crew, had suffered a similar fate, having her body ripped apart by an intruder while her family slept. One by one, I learned of each of the animalistic and brutal killings, with descriptions of the former bullies having their flesh pierced and shredded. Found on each of the bodies and in their wounds was a crystal substance. Authorities suspected it was a drug of some kind used by a junkie assailant. I knew instead that it had come from the jagged limbs of the killer itself. I also now knew one more thing, that the creature that had done these killings, my old buddy, had one final target it was coming to kill. He wanted revenge against me for not standing up for him. Helplessness could have consumed me at that moment, but I fought to keep myself rational and calm. Ellis had only killed its targets while they were in bed sleeping, I recalled. It had likely needed to catch them unaware, because it was too physically fragile to kill them otherwise. If Ellis came anywhere near me while I was awake, I would have the power to injure or, if need be, kill him. It hurt me to think about my old pal like that, but I wasn't going to let him savage me while I slept, interrupt my guilty nightmares about him with a real one. That night, I reinforced the door to my apartment with multiple locks and a security alarm. I also made the doorman aware of a deformed intruder, which may attempt to force its way up to my apartment, leaving out the part about being a literal crystal monster, of course. Finally, I left a baseball bat near my bedside table. One hit from that would turn my vengeful, monster-fied friend into a pile of glass. I don't know how I managed to doze off that night, knowing what lay outside coming to kill me, but I somehow did, revisiting my standard, regretful dreams. This time I was one of the bullies, joining in on insulting Ellis. In his eyes, I might as well have been. Suddenly I was startled awake by the sound of a cupboard door slamming. It was my closet door. I looked up, eyes groggy in the lamplight, and finally saw him up close. Ellis. The creature was horrific, composed of flesh warped into numerous white crystal shards, jutting from his body at all angles, as if he'd been frozen in ice stalactites. But these would never melt off. Underneath the translucent white, I saw nothing of his long, encased original body. As it approached my bed, I tried to put my plan into action, but my bat was only knocked to the ground by my shaking hand. Rolling underneath the bed, transfixed and defenseless, I waited for Ellis to give me what I perhaps deserved. "I'm sorry, buddy," I said resolutely. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, and sorry for not protecting you when you needed it." The crystal creature barely registered my words, instead reaching underneath the bed. Was he going to bludgeon me with my own bat? To my confusion, the shifting mass of crystal stood up, not with my bat, but with my old school bag from elementary. I'd held on to that for years out of sentimentality. Realization began to dawn on me as its jagged hand rummaged in the bag before pulling out a very old packet of pretzels. Those sharp hands tore the packet apart with ease, scattering pretzels on the ground, and plucked it out. The last, Christelle's silica gel packet in existence. I watched with awe as it shoved the sachet's contents into its mouth, like Ellis had every recess, and munched it with crystal shard teeth. This entire time, it had wanted that discontinued silica sachet, not to violently kill me like Ellis bullies. He'd never considered me one of them after all. With his one purpose sated, this unearthly being my friend had mutated into shambled backwards. Then, very suddenly, it dove out of the open bedroom window it had entered through. A second later, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the ground. All that was left of him below was a mass of crystal shards and flesh chunks. I went back to sleep that night and slept well for the first time in a long time. Safe. And forgiven. I've been tracking elk in this part of the country for 20 years. I know the difference between a staggered gait caused by a lung shot and the frantic sprint of a gut-shot beast. I know how blood oxidizes on frozen moss. I know that when you put a 180 grain bullet through the boiler room of a bull elk, it dies. It might run 100 yards, adrenaline pumping the last of its oxygen, but it dies. That's the contract. You pull the trigger, physics take over, and the animal becomes meat. But the thing Hayes and I were trailing up that ridge broke the contract. We were 3 days deep into the timber, miles past the old fire breaks, where the weekend warriors stop to drink beer and pretend they're outdoorsmen. It was just Hayes and me, the gray sky, and the silence that hangs heavy in the deep woods. The kind of silence that feels less like absence of noise and more like a held breath. We spotted the bull at dawn. It was magnificent, a heavy 6x6 rack, dark mane, breath steaming in the frigid air. It was standing in a clearing of deadfall, chewing lazily on lichen. Hayes took the shot. He's a surgeon with a rifle. I watched through the scope as the impact rippled through the elk's shoulder. The animal bucked, legs kicking high, and scrambled into the dense hemlock. "Solid hit," Hayes whispered, cycling the bolt. Pink mist. Lungs. We waited the requisite 30 minutes to let it bed down and bleed out. When we walked to the impact site, the snow was painted with bright, frothy blood. Arterial spray. Textbook kill. We found the first anomaly 100 yards in. The blood trail didn't thin out. It remained a thick, crimson ribbon, far more fluid than a single animal could possess. But it was the tracks that stopped me. "Miller?" Hayes said, his voice tight. He was kneeling by a patch of mud near a creek crossing. "Look at the spread." I crouched beside him. The elk's hoof prints were there, deep in the mud, but the stride length was impossible. Between the last step and this one, the animal had cleared nearly 15 feet without jumping. There were no impact marks, no skid of dew claws digging in for traction. It was as if the animal had simply extended its legs to unnatural lengths to step over the gap. "Adrenaline," I said. Though I didn't believe it, it's running on pure fear. "Elk don't stretch like that, Miller. Nothing does." We kept moving. The sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows through the trees. The temperature dropped, freezing the mud into jagged ridges. The second anomaly appeared 2 miles later. Usually a wounded animal heads downhill, towards water and thick cover. It takes the path of least resistance. This thing was climbing. It was heading straight up a scree field, a 40-degree incline of loose shale that would break a horse's leg. And the blood had changed. It was no longer bright and frothy. It was dark, almost black, and it smelled wrong. Not like copper and iron. It smelled like bile and wet limestone. "I don't like this," Hayes muttered, looking up the slope. The wind was picking up, whistling through the dead pines. "It's leading us. It's dying, Hayes. It's confused." "It's not confused. Look at the trail." He pointed. The blood trail wasn't erratic. It was a straight line. Perfectly straight. The animal hadn't stumbled once. We pushed up the scree, our boots sliding on the loose rock. When we crested the ridge, the light was failing. We entered a dense stand of old-growth spruce, the canopy so thick it choked out the sky. It was dark in there, a gloom that felt heavy and pressurized. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a bugle. It wasn't the distress cry of a dying animal. It sounded like wet wood snapping, magnified 100 times. Crack. Splurch. Ahead, I signaled. We moved slowly, rifles shouldered. The smell hit us first, a wave of rot so potent it made my eyes water. It smelled of musk, yes, but underneath that was the sickly sweet stench of ancient, fermented meat. We found the elk standing in a small clearing, facing away from us. It was motionless, its head hung low, the massive rack of antlers swaying slightly in the breeze. But something was wrong with the silhouette. It looked too tall. The proportions were skewed. "Drop it," I whispered. "Finish it." Hayes raised his rifle. "Miller, look at the knees." I adjusted my scope. The magnification brought the animal's hind legs into sharp relief. The knees were backwards. Not just dog-legged like a quadruped, but inverted entirely, bent sharply upward, and there were too many of them. The leg didn't go hip, knee, ankle. It went hip, joint, 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 ankle. The legs were segmented, like the limbs of a harvestman spider, folded up under the body to stimulate the height of an elk. As we watched, the creature shifted its weight. A sickening, wet clicking sound echoed through the clearing. The elk rose. It didn't just stand up, it unfolded. The segmented legs extended, lifting the torso 7, 8, 9 feet into the air. The skin on its flanks stretched tight, translucent and tearing, revealing the underneath, the hide. There was no muscle, no organs, just a cage of white, wet bone, and gray sinew moving in a complex, clicking geometry. "That's not an elk," Hayes breathed. The creature's head, still wearing the skin and antlers of the bull, swiveled. It didn't turn on the neck. It rotated 180 degrees with the sound of grinding gristle. The eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with the same dark black fluid we had been tracking. It saw us. Hayes fired. The shot roared, the muzzle flash illuminating the clearing for a split second. I saw the bullet hit the chest. The hide puffed out, but there was no impact tremor. The creature didn't flinch. It simply absorbed the energy, the loose skin rippling like water. Then it moved. It didn't run. It scuttled. The multi-jointed legs moved with a horrific, frenetic speed, tearing up the earth. It closed the 40 yards between us in seconds, moving in a low, zigzagging blur that the eye couldn't track. "Run!" I screamed, backing up and firing blindly. Hayes didn't run. He froze. It's a reaction I've seen in greenhorns, but never in a veteran. His brain simply couldn't process the biology coming at him. He stood there, rifle half raised, mouth open. The creature didn't bite him. It didn't gore him. It collided with him. The long, spider-like legs wrapped around Hayes, not crushing him, but pinning him. The creature's torso collapsed onto him, the elk skin draping over him like a wet blanket. I heard Hayes scream, a sound that quickly turned into a wet gurgle. I turned and ran. I ran with the reckless abandon of prey, tearing through brambles that sliced my face, stumbling over roots, sliding down the scree field we had climbed an hour ago. Behind me, the forest was filled with sounds that will never leave me. It wasn't the sound of eating, it was the sound of rearrangement. The wet snapping of bone, the popping of cartilage being forced into new angles, and underneath it all, a low chittering sound, like 1,000 insects vibrating in a hollow log. I made it to the tree line of the valley floor and collapsed, my lungs burning, my ankle twisted. I lay there in the dark, Rifle pointed back at the ridge, shivering so hard the barrel rattled against my teeth. I waited for it to come for me. I waited for the clicking joints, the smell of rot. But it didn't come. Instead, silence reclaimed the woods. A heavy, absolute silence. Then, from high up on the ridge, I heard a bugle. It started as a normal elk call, a high-pitched whistle rising to a scream, but halfway through the timber changed. The pitch dropped, gargling and warping. It shifted into a human voice, distorted and stretched, screaming a single, elongated syllable that echoed off the canyon walls. Miller. It was Hayes' voice, but it sounded like he was being pushed through a throat made of PVC pipe and gravel. Then, silence again. I didn't sleep. I didn't move until the sun came up. I hiked out, 18 miles without stopping, without looking back. I left my gear, my pack, everything but the rifle. I reported it as a bear attack. I told the sheriff we got separated and I heard a commotion. They did a search. They found Hayes' rifle. They found his boots, laced tight, still standing upright in the mud. But they didn't find Hayes, or rather, they didn't find a body. They found tracks. The search and rescue lead, a guy I've known for years, pulled me aside at the trailhead a week later. He looked pale, shaken. He told me they found elk tracks leading away from the site where they found the boots. But they were wrong, Miller, he whispered, looking over his shoulder. The tracks, the stride was huge, 20 feet between steps, and the weight, the depth of the prints suggested the animal weighed 2,000 pounds. He paused, swallowing hard. And Miller? The tracks, only 2 of them were hooves. The other 2? The rear ones. He didn't have to say it. I knew. They looked like hands, he whispered. Big, splayed hands pressing into the mud. I stopped hunting. I sold my guns. I moved to the city where the only sounds are sirens and the traffic. But sometimes, when the wind blows right, coming off the mountains in the west, I can hear it. I can hear the clicking. And I know that somewhere up on that ridge, there is a stag with too many joints, walking through the timber on legs that shouldn't exist. And woven into that cage of bone and rot, there is a part of it that remembers my name. Calm down, slow your breathing. You need to slow down and think. My panic subsided. The sound of my heart pounding in my ears dissipated as my body focused. My ragged breathing became calm and measured. The gentle lull of the water's currents flowed past as the muffled silence of the sea closed in around me. My air tank read just under 10% left. Damn, I'd been sucking air like I was running a marathon. My left hand gripped the anchor line, leading back to the inflatable dinghy waiting on the surface. Down below, the prow of the ancient shipwreck stared up at me, partially obscured in the shadows of the bottom of the sea. 50 feet to the surface. 50 feet to escape. I checked my watch. 40 more seconds until the decompression break is over. 40 seconds until I can resume my slow ascent. I tried to ignore the shadow bobbing on the surface next to the dinghy, a humanoid shape resting at the surface of the ocean. Mark isn't moving anymore. He stopped a few minutes ago. I catch a sob in my throat, and my eyes sting in my goggles as tears threaten to break free. Stavros' directions repeated in my head. I can almost see him standing in front of Mark and I in the resort villa. Sounds of splashing and laughter drifted in from the pool as we were briefed on today's dive. Now listen up, the bends are no joke. Under no circumstances do you ascend at any rate faster than 30 feet per minute. On this dive, you especially need to be careful. With how long we'll be down there, we'll need to take decompression breaks. Our bodies need time to adjust, and off-gas the extra nitrogen. I can feel Mark's hand around my waist tighten, his eyes alight with anticipation. My heart skips a beat. I'll never see those eyes again. This was supposed to be the start of our life together, the start of our great adventure, our honeymoon. Scuba diving in Greece with our own personal guide was a dream for us. Years of pinched pennies, overtime, and the generosity of family helped us make this dream come true. After a backyard wedding, we packed our bags and hit the airport, excited for the adventure awaiting us. 8 days and 4 dives later, we were 1 away from our advanced diving certification. This morning was our 5th and final dive, the grand finale, as Stavros dubbed it, an unexplored shipwreck 110 feet down. When Stavros told us his plan over dinner, we both agreed immediately. An unexplored shipwreck was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That night, as the warmth from the wine and food lulled us to sleep, unknown treasures came to me in my dreams. We set off on a beautiful summer day. When we arrived at the location, our eyes scanned the water looking for a sign. After a few minutes, Mark spotted a darker blue outline against the blue of the bottom of the ocean. The excitement was palpable as we geared up, checked and double-checked each other's equipment. One by one, we sat on the edge of the inflated dinghy and launched ourselves backwards into the water. We all let air out of our BCDs slowly as we started to descend our diving weights, controlling our slow fall into the sea below, 30 feet to the surface. I looked down at my gauge, 7% left in the tank. I continued upwards at an agonizing pace. As I swam closer, details of Mark came into view. His mouth and eyes, left open, trickled blood into the water, enveloping him in a pink haze. His wrist, tangled in the rope, jerks his body as another wave bobs the dinghy up and down. Could he feel as the compressed air tore holes in his lungs, and as bubbles of nitrogen were introduced into his bloodstream? Did the panic mask the pain until it was too late? The wreck came into view as we sank closer. It wasn't a frigate or modern shipwreck, but much older. It was an ancient Greek warship wrecked on the sea floor. Rows of holes poked at the side where dozens of oars would once stick out, propelling the ship. A forest of coral covered the hull in bright pinks, oranges, blues, and yellows. Small shapes danced in and around the reef. A school of small fish flitted by. Their scales were a pearlescent gradient of blues and pinks that sparkled in the low light. They danced around us before darting into the ship's rower's deck. A large green octopus with yellow rings observed us before sliding into a crack it had made its home. After taking in the rare beauty of the wreck, we began to explore. Whatever sunk the ship left a giant, jagged hole near the stern. A snaggle-toothed maw of shattered, mossy wooden planks laid open, and we eagerly swam toward it. Thoughts of future discoveries clouded our judgment. We didn't notice the slow current that helped us along, slowly guiding us toward the opening. We didn't notice that the water in the cabin was bitterly cold and stagnant. Outside was teeming with life and movement, but inside the small cabin, we were completely alone. As we entered the wreck, we saw an onyx pedestal stood in the middle of the debris-filled room. Covered in broken planks and shattered ceramic, it stood 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. We could barely see the sparkle of intricate gold carvings on its surface. Stavros, Mark, and I got to work moving aside planks in a hurry to lay eyes on the discovery. A low groan from below roused me from the memory and reverberated through the sea. The temperature dropped as the sunlight dimmed. I spared a glance down at the wreck and regretted it immediately. Clouds of inky black billowed out of the hull. A pure darkness raced along the sea floor, obscuring the wreck, the sand and the rocks surrounding it. The darkness was too deep, as if a trench opened up under me going down miles and miles where nothing could live in the bitter cold and crushing pressures. As I stared, twinkling lights blinked into life from the abyss. I turned, kicking my legs faster, ascending towards the dinghy. Stavros wasn't enough for this thing. It was coming for me. After a laborious few minutes, we cleared the pedestal from the debris. It was a sight to behold, a black onyx pedestal that depicted pictures of a battle thousands of years in the past. The glistening carved lines, inlaid with gold, stood in contrast to the midnight rock of the pedestal. Carvings of warships charged down massive waves, ramming into their enemy. Above the scene, in the inky black night, a large golden eye surveyed the battlefield. Mark gestured to the top of the pedestal, and we saw a half-spherical depression stood empty. We began searching the ground, brushing aside shattered ornate ceramics and decayed wooden planks, searching for a lost artifact knocked loose from its pedestal millennia ago. I let out a cry and a burst of bubbles from my regulator as my hand brushed by something hard. Lying on the ocean floor was a sphere. The artifact was the size of a grapefruit. It shone in the beam of my flashlight, a brilliant gold. Mark and Stavros made their way to see my discovery as I reached down to pick up the artifact. The artifact was warm to the touch. A feeling of overwhelming comfort wrapped around my hands as the sphere shone like polished gold in my flashlight's beam. Mark put his hand on my shoulder and leaned in to take a closer look. The light of his flashlight glinted off the edges of swirling patterns engraved into the surface. As the light danced across it, the swirls almost seemed to be moving. The three of us stared at a fortune in my hands. The warmth spread up my arms and into my chest as the current gently nudged me in towards the pedestal. As if in a dream, I floated to the top and placed the warm golden sphere into its place on top of the pedestal. We all floated, transfixed as the sphere began to rotate slowly in the depression of the pedestal. The engraving swirled up and down like the waves of a great ocean as a low thrumming filled the room. Faster and faster the waves crashed on the sides of the ball, until it was a blur of spinning gold. Mark grabbed me by the shoulder and began pulling me towards the exit. Stavros stood transfixed, and I just watched as the sphere stopped moving. A sickly crack of yellow light worked its way across the artifact. It hissed and screeched as the crack grew larger and larger. Like golden eyelids, the crack opened, revealing a massive yellow eye, with a jet-black pupil that filled the room with a sickly light. It stared at us, moving from one to the other cornea, contracting and relaxing as it took in its surroundings. The eye shot up on a torrent of tarry black liquid that spewed from the top of the pedestal. It poured over the sides and spread along the floor. What once was the seafloor of the cabin became a vast nothingness stretching miles below the floor of the sea. My transfixion was replaced by fear as I launched myself towards the mouth of the cabin. The blackness covered the sandy floor, and when it reached the walls of the ship, began climbing. Mark led the way with Stavros behind, as we swam with all our might out of the wrecked ship. A low groan emanated from the nothingness. The sound coming from the depths of the cabin sounded like a whale's death cry. A muffled scream reached my ears as Stavros shouted. Something thin and dark had wound its way around his leg and began pulling him into the ship. His hand scrambled for purchase, but the smooth hull offered no salvation. He pulled his diving knife, burying it deep in the ship, anchoring himself as his legs were pulled inside the hole of the wreck. I doubled back, reaching for his hand, and our fingers touched before he was pulled again by the inky black tendrils, snaking their way up his leg and around his hip. His knife held but his shoulder dislocated, with a muffled pop as his hips were dragged into the hole. I reached out again as another chorus of cracking bones and cries of pain came from Stavros as his body was stretched beyond its limit. His eyes, wild with fear, caught mine. His hand could no longer hold on under the tremendous pressure, and his scream echoed through the sea as he disappeared into the blackness of the wreck. I screamed as I turned around and swam as fast as I could up and away from the wreck. "Now listen up. The bends are no joke." Stavros' words rang in my ears, and I looked forward in horror. Mark hadn't stopped to help. He was already 30 feet above me, kicking as fast as he could towards the surface. I yelled again in a rush of bubbles, but he couldn't hear. I could see the panic in his body. Nothing I could do would stop his suicidal ascent. All I could do was watch as Mark slowly killed himself. Every panicked foot he swam towards safety. The pit in my stomach grew as I checked my instruments and began my slow ascent. 20 feet to the surface. The ocean has grown frigid cold as the clouds continue to cover the sun. The waves tossed Mark's body and the boat back and forth. Below me the darkness had spread. It continued to reach up, getting ever closer toward me. I kicked my feet furiously, ascending as fast as possible. 10 feet to the surface. I could feel the gaze as the yellow eye stared into my back. I saw its sickly light reflecting off my instruments. I felt a swish below me as something grazed my flipper. I have no time to look back. 5 feet to the surface. Something tangled itself around my left flipper and pulled down hard. I kicked back, and the flipper was yanked free. Ice crystallized in my mask, and my joints screamed out in pain as my body reacted to my fast ascent. Mark's body and the dinghy were almost within reach. Then I was face to face with Mark. His eyes, gray and lifeless, stared deep into mine, the same eyes that teared up on our wedding day as I walked down the aisle. The eyes I was going to grow old with. "I'm sorry." I climbed, hand over hand, using Mark's scuba equipment as a handhold. The wind whipped sea spray into my face as my body tumbled into the inflatable dinghy. I was in the middle of a storm. The boat was rocked by waves as I stumbled to the outboard engine. Through sea spray and rocking waves, I pulled the starter cord. I thanked Stavros for taking care of his equipment as the engine sputtered to life. I pulled the throttle hard. The boat accelerated forward before it whipped around, anchored by the line tethered to the front of the ship. I was thrown to the floor of the dinghy and scrambled my way to the bow where the anchor line was tied. I reached for the diving knife at my hip and began hacking at the cord as something pulled from below. Black tendrils snaked their way up Mark's body, pulling him deeper. As he was dragged down, the front of the boat dipped below the waves taking on water. His hand, wound around the anchor cord, pulled us below the waves. I took a breath as the icy water engulfed the dinghy, as the front was submerged. Yellow golden light poured from the great eye as we came face to face. An abyss of starry night surrounded us as its tendrils pulled Mark and the dinghy. Stars and galaxies twinkled in the infinite ocean of space. The great eye studied me, an iris miles across, growing and shrinking in a brilliant yellow cornea contracted. It was the finite and the infinite, floating in deep black space. With another hack, the cord snapped. Mark disappeared under the waves as the dinghy rocketed towards the surface. The sputtering of the motor motivated my screaming joints as I threw myself at the tiller. I caught it in my hand and twisted hand on the throttle. The dinghy shot forward, speeding up the nearest swell and cresting it with ease. I sped back towards the island. The wind whipped my hair. Tears stung my cheeks as I let out a muffled sob. The clouds above grew more and more sparse. The sun began to peek through, and the waves settled. I left the storm behind as I skipped across the water. I came to in a hospital bed a week later. My mother held my hand as my eyes flitted open. For the next few days, I underwent tests and took questions from the police. I told as much as I could and they let me go. I feel empty, drifting through the days. Through work, friends, and life, I am a shadow of my former self. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, anxious for sleep. When I finally drift off, the great eye calls to me from another place. It thanks me with warm, comforting dreams. I long for the peace it promises me, a future holding hands with Mark as we drift from star to star, exploring a new galaxy all to our own, a future without pain or worry. In my dreams I feel whole, deep below the waves in the embrace of its infinite gaze. You see, I'm quite ill. So ill that my husband has hired an entire staff to tend to me in the house, because there is so much I cannot do anymore. Every morning, one of my attendants wakes me up and brings me my breakfast and my medication. So many pills that I have to take. But they do seem to help. Sometimes I can sit up in my bed and feed myself, though my hands shake terribly and my muscles are so stiff. Other times, my attendant must sit with me and feed me like I am an infant. It used to be embarrassing when I first started needing so much extra help, but I have become accustomed to it. I'm grateful for my attendants and everything they do for me. After breakfast, the children usually come visit me in my room, my beautiful angels, all with their halos of golden curls and their sparkling blue eyes. They run about the room, laughing and playing chase, jumping on my bed and leaping to the floor. I never caution them or tell them to stop, because it warms my heart to see them having so much fun. I have 3 babies, and they will always be my babies, no matter how much time passes. My oldest, Jocelyn, is 8. She is starting to look so much like me, I think, with her sharp, pointed nose and her delicate brows, always furrowed in thought. Her cheeks are starting to lose the chubbiness of childhood, and my heart aches to see her growing up so fast. Simon is my middle child and my only boy, and what a boy he is. Wild, unbothered by the rules my husband and I tried to enforce so many times over the years. He has my full, pouty lips, and I can tell that when he is older, he will have his father's strong brow and jawline, and he's only 6 years old. He looks to me like a Greek carving out of marble, with the hard lines of his bone structure that are still so softened by the babyishness of his features. But even he looks so grown up to me now. My youngest is Evelyn, and she's only 3. She has such a sweet, cherubic little face, with her impossibly long eyelashes and her rosy, chubby cheeks. She cannot run as fast or jump as high as her siblings, but she tags along as quickly as her little legs will carry her. She still cuddles with me the most, curling up next to me in my arms when I take my naps before lunch. The sweet smell of her hair fills my nose and sends me off to sleep so peacefully. When the children aren't tearing around my room like whirling dervishes, they often go out to play in the garden. Jocelyn and Simon are always so gentle with Evelyn and always make sure to wait for her to catch up. I'm so lucky to have such sweet babies who love each other so much. I used to be able to join them in the garden before I got sick, and sometimes it makes me sad that I'm stuck inside, in my room. I have a rotating cast of attendants who stay with me each day, understandably so, since I imagine that they all have families to get home to once their shifts caring for me are done. My husband has insisted I have care around the clock, so I have 3 different attendants each day for each shift, morning, evening, and overnight. My attendants help me shower every morning and help me get dressed each day. It means so much to be able to wear clean, fresh clothes every day, and not rot away in bed wearing the same gown for days on end. Tiffany, who is one of my favorites, will brush out my long hair and do it up in a lovely French braid for me. I only see her twice a week, though, and the other attendants don't seem to want to bother with my hair. It can become quite tangled by the time Tiffany comes again, and she will spend so much time patiently and gently teasing the knots from my hair. Sometimes she'll murmur as she combs and braids, "Miss Margaret, where are those beautiful babies of yours?" I always tell her they must be elsewhere in the house, perhaps playing with their dollhouse or sprawled in the playroom reading books. Tiffany always clicks her tongue and doesn't say anything to that. Of course, in addition to my attendants, I have my doctors. Dr. Phillips is a tall, thin man with graying hair cropped close and big, thick-framed black glasses that always look precariously close to sliding right off the end of his long nose. Dr. Phillips comes to see me every day after lunch to check on me and ask me how I'm feeling. He usually gets the same answer from me every day. Dr. Wilcox, who told me that I can call her Jennifer, is a doctor for my feelings. That's how she explained it to me when we first met. She said that being sick can bring up all kinds of negative feelings, and she wanted me to feel comfortable sharing with her if there was anything I was struggling with. She never makes much headway with me. I'm always too tired after talking to Dr. Phillips to answer any of her questions. Sometimes I do answer her questions, and she gives me a peculiar look and jots down in her notebook. I don't know what she does with that notebook after she leaves my room, but I think I'd like to read it someday. Everyone who cares for me wears a uniform. I guess it's mandatory for the agency that my husband hired them from. The only person who comes to see me who never wears a uniform is my friend Allison. Allison always brings her dog, Fig, who is a huge auburn-colored golden retriever. The first time I met Allison and Fig, I could tell Allison was a little apprehensive. She held Fig's leash tightly in her fist, though you wouldn't guess it from how the leash dangled with plenty of slack. But I noticed these things. Allison said something under her breath to one of my attendants as Fig approached me in the chair. The dog walked right up to me and placed her giant, blocky head right in my lap, looking up at me with her soft brown eyes. I lifted a hand and gently patted her head, and then scratched behind her ears, and she closed her eyes and let the full weight of her head settle against my leg. I saw Allison's grip on the leash relax, and I heard her quietly mutter, "Figgy is a great judge of character," to my attendant, who shrugged his shoulders and then looked away, almost irritated. After that first meeting, Allison has brought Fig to visit me each week. If I'm in bed, Fig will jump up and lie beside me, warming me with her silken auburn fur. Allison will always pull up a chair and sit next to me, and she always makes small talk about the weather or tells me a funny story about what Figgy has gotten up to since the last time we met. Allison even reaches out and holds my hand sometimes, and gives me a knowing look. She once asked me why I'm sick, and I told her it was better for both of us if she didn't know, but that didn't scare her away. One day, that same attendant, who was there during my first meeting with Allison and Fig, pulled up a chair rather close to me and Allison than he normally would, and opened up a newspaper to read. The big headline on the front read, "Father of children missing for 3 years petitions to have them officially declared dead." A sad story, to be sure. A picture of the father with his children, all beaming at the camera, took up most of the front page. My husband has to travel so much for work that he is rarely able to visit with me. When he does, he often meets with my doctors, and they discuss things in hushed tones. I catch snippets as they speak. No progress, no new information, different medication. My husband has control over my treatment, because my illness often makes me too tired and disoriented to be able to consent to any changes. My husband has learned only to come visit me before 5 p.m., because there have been one too many visits after dinner when he had come into my room to see me and something awful has come over me and I have attacked him. Lunged out of my bed or my wheelchair with my hands outstretched, clawing for his throat and eyes as my attendant springs into action to restrain me. Whenever this has happened, my husband refuses to meet my eyes with his, afraid to look at me and acknowledge the real reason why I want to kill him, a reason only he and I will ever know. You see, my morning medications really start to wear off after dinner, and I can't have my evening doses until 7 p.m. As the afternoon turns to evening, I feel my symptoms start to come back. My vision, blurry and unfocused during the day, becomes sharper. The golden light that bathes everything darkens and becomes cold and blue, throwing everything into harsh relief and making my surroundings feel unwelcoming and clinical. My head, so foggy and sluggish all day, begins to clear, and my memories start to come back. I see my attendants for what they really are, employees begrudgingly tasked with watching over me, rather than dedicated and compassionate caregivers. The worst, though, is my children. When they come to visit me after dinner, they no longer look happy and angelic, and full of life and laughter. They no longer look the way I want to remember them. Instead, they look the way I am forced to remember them. Jocelyn's scalp is half ripped away from her skull, and her left eye is missing. Blood stains her nose and mouth, and she has thick, purple bruising around her neck. Her head hangs at an odd angle, and her legs can only shuffle her forward as she tries to walk on compound fractures with shards of bone piercing her skin. The entire left side of Simon's head has been completely caved in, and he spits and sputters bubbles of blood as he struggles to draw in raggedy breaths. His rib cage is crushed and splintered, and his lungs flap uselessly against his chest wall. And Evelyn, my poor, sweet baby girl, too young to even understand what was happening to her. Her eyes are black, filled completely with dead blood. Her tongue is huge and purple and protrudes from her mouth. She, too, bears thick bruising around her neck, although this is barely noticeable due to the fact that she now carries her head in her tiny little hands, because it was ripped completely from her shoulders. They all come to me and stare at me, crying. "Why, Mama?" It used to drive me mad at first, and more often than not, when they showed up to haunt me, I would claw so deeply at my arms as I screamed in anguish that I ended up bound to my bed in padded restraints while a nurse administered an injection to put me to sleep. Now, I just cry silently. I don't look away because my babies deserve to be seen, but my heart shatters into a million pieces over and over again every night when they come to remind me of what I've done. A trucker found me on the side of the highway 3 years ago, covered in blood, some of it mine, some of it not. At the emergency room, they tried to get me to tell them what happened to me, but I couldn't. All I could do was scream as I pictured my babies the way I left them before I escaped into the woods. I think I hoped to get lost and die of exposure out there, but instead I stumbled out onto the roadway and nearly got hit by a truck. Dying that way would have been better than I deserved. When the police showed up to question me, the emergency room staff were confused, but then the detective explained. My husband had reported the children and me missing that morning. After waking up to find the house empty, he told the police that I hadn't been well lately, hadn't been taking my medications, and he was worried that I may have harmed the children. The police knew as much when they saw me on that gurney, covered in my children's blood, and I couldn't speak to tell them what happened. They finally sedated me to get me to stop screaming, and when I woke up I was handcuffed to the bed rail, and a cop sat in the corner of my room staring me down. They took me to court, but I was found to be incompetent of stand trial. The state psychologist who examined me determined that I had entered a catatonic state and that, in my stupor, I was incapable of understanding the charges being brought against me, and that's how I ended up here at Willow Grove, the highest security forensic psychiatric hospital in the state, imprisoned amongst others deemed incompetent to stand trial, like me, or those who were found not criminally responsible, which is the technical term for not guilty by reason of insanity. And here I've stayed for the past 3 years. After a constant fog of antipsychotics and benzodiazepines, unable to tell anyone what really happened the night I was found, unable to tell anyone the real reason I have attacked my husband so many times, the reason that only he and I will ever know. Because it wasn't me who hurt my precious babies that night in the woods. I had always dealt with sleep apnea ever since I was a child. My father had the same condition, so my parents didn't care that we were both choking in our sleep. When I started sleeping in the same bed with my wife, she did not find the way I sleep charming and had me go to the doctor. That's when I started going on the CPAP machine. I always had disconcerting dreams as a kid. It was always a gamble of either eerily peaceful landscapes to horrifying torture scenes. From being in a forested meadow, watching a girl galloping through it as a half-deer centaur, to watching a man get slowly chewed and nipped by thousands of rats in a room made of hardened, scarred flesh. I was never the one experiencing it. Rather, I was watching someone else experience it. I never wanted to share my dreams, since the last time I did, I got a talking to with my school counselor and parents. When I went on the CPAP machine, my dreams changed. I was no longer suddenly appearing in a place, rather I was floating in space. Surrounding me were thousands of stars, each the size of a baseball, stretching infinitely. When I first saw it, I was in awe. I urged myself forward and swam through the sea of stars, and then I accidentally hit one of them. The star grew until it fully encompassed me. I landed on the ground and ended up in a field of sunflowers, tall enough where the heads reached my shoulders. As I wandered around, I found a clearing with a woman laying down on a soft futon. She looked up from the shadow I casted and had a genuine look of confusion. "Who are you?" she yelled. This was the first time anyone had ever noticed my presence, so I was scared. I ran back and broke through the fields of sunflowers until I ended up back into the ocean of stars. Then the alarm woke me up. I started exploring the space every time I slept, exploring at least 2 stars a night. It was the same as the dreams I always dreamt, a 50% chance of it being either a nightmare or a dream. I once saw a man on a treadmill running while having to peel his bloodied feet from the track, as it was constantly melting into it. Stuff like that. I always thought that I was ending up in the dreams and nightmares of others, that they would soon wake up like me. One night I ended up in a dream of a small girl, around 6. It was a birthday party in the backyard with balloons and a big plastic table with a huge 5-tiered chocolate cake, and a spread of food all around it. Spaghetti, barbecue sticks, fried chicken, kids' party stuff. The one thing that creeped me out was that everybody else at the party had no face. The children and the adults all had hair and clothes, but their face was completely blank. And they were only standing and staring at the girl. The girl had light brown hair and a heavy splash of freckles. She was stuffing her face with cake and chicken. She had bright green eyes. When she saw me, she babbled with excitement and grabbed my hand to join her. I didn't want to stay, but she got a handful of cake, as big as she could, and stuffed it in my hand. I stayed and ate with her. They didn't taste like anything, so she enjoyed it more than me. Then I woke up. At work, I saw the picture of the girl on the screen. She had been dead for 6 months. Her body was found in the basement with 2 others. I stared at her green eyes and the blurry photograph, a picture taken on her birthday, with chocolate cake splattered across her freckled face. From then on, I tried talking to those I visited, those in peaceful places at least, and I confirmed my theory: they were dead. Some for longer than others. One old man in a mushroom cottage didn't have a last name, calling himself Robin's son. For a while I accepted this. I stopped trying to find their obituaries. There was nothing I could do. They were stuck in their little realms in either total bliss or total despair. All I could ever do was come in and chat with them. All the people in their calm realms were very friendly and kind. They shared coffee, teas, meals, all things that I couldn't taste but enjoyed nonetheless. I asked about when they were alive. They wouldn't remember. They knew their name, and that was about it. I guess I understood why. It's easier to be happier when you don't know what you're missing. On one of my travels, I ended up in a flat, foggy place. The floor was purely concrete and the sky was pitch black. Walking through it, I found a boy, sleeping on a bed. He had long hair, spread across the pillow, but I couldn't see his face. When I called him, he wouldn't wake up, so I left. At work, I saw what might be him. He was missing. A 16-year-old boy with long hair. I knew I had to help, at least try to find where he was last. I searched the stars. I never tried to visit a place twice, but I had to this time. It took 2 nights, searching through every star as quickly as possible, until I found him again, in the dark, foggy realms. I ran up to him and shook him awake. I shouted at him, "Do you remember where you were before you came here?" He was groggy. He didn't want to wake up, but I kept on shaking him until he sat up on the bed. I asked his name and where he lived. It was the same as the news coverage, but when I asked where he was before he came there, he drew a blank. I stayed with him for as long as possible, trying to retrace his steps. He remembered he was going to be a senior. He was bullied, and that he wanted to disappear. He wandered around town, and that was when his memory stopped. I feared for the worst, so I asked him where he usually liked to hang out. He said at the bridge at the edge of town, above a river. When I woke up, I went to the phone and called, saying he might be at the river. I hung up before they could ask who I was and waited for the news. That night they found him. His body moved downstream and was found in another town. I tried helping more, but the most I got was where they were last. It didn't help with kidnapping cases. At some point, I didn't want to go to sleep. I didn't want to float around knowing that I was only helping to find their bodies, and that I couldn't help them any further than that. At one point, I accidentally fell asleep without the CPAP machine, and I ended up in that little girl's heaven again. She was running around with the faceless kids, playing a game of tag. Soon she found me and asked me to join her. We played around for a while, eating barbecue and fried chicken, till I woke up again. There's 2 things I can tell. The first is that it's there. The second is that it's doing its best to make sure I don't know that it's there. It's quiet, is what I mean. So quiet that I keep second-guessing myself in the night. In the day, too, even as I'm writing this. But I'm positive something is there. It's small things, just frequent, consistent. Something scratching against the hardwood floor, the sheets at the far corner, the ones hanging off the edge of my bed, sliding as something goes past them underneath. I leave clothes on my desk chair a lot. I hear those too. See, it sounds like when I used to have a pet cat, the way something small and nocturnal does moving around your space in the middle of the night, aware that you're there, but I haven't had a cat in years, and never in this apartment. I live with 3 roommates in this weird kind of place. Not spooky weird, but it's an old house that got converted into apartments by putting walls in weird places. So I have this closet that's underneath the next door's apartment staircase. The ceiling of my closet is diagonal, and it stretches really far back once you go inside. We filled it up with boxes and extra things that didn't have a place yet when we moved in, and haven't gotten around to unpacking, so it's kind of a maze right there in my bedroom. I'm pretty sure that's where it goes during the day. I haven't checked too deep since I'm honestly worried about finding it. You're asking why I don't sleep on the couch or move altogether. Last night was the first night I felt sure it was there. Like I said, it's so on the line of being nothing that I kept dismissing it. It's just the house settling. Winter heating causing expansion or something. You know when you throw a sweater on the back of a chair and it takes an hour to fall to the ground and make a noise, even though nothing's touching it? I kept dismissing it as that kind of thing. There's always a plausible explanation. Maybe that's how it gets by. The suspicion's been growing for a while. Last night made me sure. I've been having more trouble falling asleep. Usually fall asleep to a video playing, white noise, or something. Last night my phone died. My charger was across the room. I didn't feel like getting up since it was 1 a.m. or something, so I just lay there in the dark, eyes closed, trying to make myself fall asleep. I can't get to sleep, but I guess enough time went by that it seemed like I was sleeping. I start to hear it again, just barely. You know when you have to focus to hear something, otherwise you'll miss it? Tapping on the floor from my open closet door, softer padding when it gets to carpet. It brushed up against the blanket hanging off my bed. I could feel it there. I heard it breathing and that was it. It's low to the ground, which is why I was thinking of a pet or something earlier. Who knows? Maybe it's a rat or a rodent or something. That's a plausible explanation. But this sounded like human breathing, kind of high and wheezing. I could hear that its mouth was open. My eyes opened. I couldn't help it. Maybe my body tensed. I heard the breathing stop, like it could tell. For whatever reason, my instinct was to close my eyes and pretend I was asleep. You know how sometimes you'd be up late as a kid? You'd hear your parents and you'd know to pretend to be asleep a second before they walked in? I felt like that, except cold all over. I could hear it walking again, so softly and carefully. I could feel it get closer and closer to my face. I could feel the presence of it, even with my eyes closed. The sense that something was there. The body heat of it or something. I knew if I opened my eyes, I'd be face to face with it. Part of me wanted to just so that I could know, but I couldn't do it. The worst part was that it just stayed there, that close to me, unmoving, but breathing quietly. It didn't do anything, didn't touch me, didn't go anywhere else, but just stayed there for hours. And I mean hours. I didn't sleep the whole night. At some point, I felt it leave, and minutes later, I felt sunlight hitting my closed eyes. It was dawn, 7 in the morning. That was this morning. It's almost night again. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't sleep here tonight, but I don't want to leave it alone with the people I live with, and I know I'm going to sound crazy if I try to explain what I experienced. But I know what I know. I know that it's there. For various reasons, I can't give my name. I've had to alter certain details, such as names, in this to save my butt. But the public needs to know. I am being locked up tomorrow, and I need to get this out now. There are monsters in the world. Beasts, creatures, aberrations, horrors, and more. I work in a facility that contains them, located deep in the Pacific Ocean. Almost every folkloric and mythological creature has a kernel of truth to its story, and that's where we come in. For example, the Draugr of Norse mythology. They're more than shape-shifting, dream-infiltrating zombies. The real beasts are what we call a level 6 threat, one of the kinds you don't survive by accident. We don't know how they appear, but they can walk through space-time like a frayed seam being pulled apart, and it allows them to fall ever so slightly out of sync with the material world. They are classified as the species Reanimatus vigilans, the watchful reanimated. But I digress. I'm here because something escaped the facility, and we can't find it. The creature, which my colleagues and I affectionately call the Surgeon, first appeared in 1888. It is the only creature to ever receive a Level 8 threat classification. The Surgeon was discovered in the wake of the Jack the Ripper murders. The crime scenes turned heads in certain directions and caught the attention of my organization. We got involved and noticed certain substances in the victims. No one knew what it was, but the organization had the brains to collect a sample and keep it, a thick, red goo, with the texture of maple syrup and the smell of copper. Then, in 1902, a gruesome murder occurred in Russia. A poor girl, no more than 19 years old, was found mutilated in her home. When I took the job of studying the Surgeon, I read the files, and I still can't get those images out of my head. At that murder, that substance was found again. The organization caught wind and began investigating more thoroughly. We came to the conclusion that the substance was a paralytic. Anyone who is exposed will lose the ability to move, but retains all feeling. After the Russia incident, any murders with this substance were kept confidential. Only the immediate investigators and the organization were allowed to know. Panic, superstition, any public trace would have compromised everything, and with more knowledge of the Surgeon's MO, we got better at finding them. From 1902 to 1984, the Surgeon claimed the lives of 96 innocent women. We finally caught him by using certain tools that could get me thrown into the depths of hell for naming. What we found shocked us all. A middle-aged man in a Victorian-era doctor's uniform, blood-covered gloves dangling at his sides, stood over a woman. Sadly, we didn't catch him in time and we lost her. Her chest was a gaping cavity, and although her heart was beating when we got there, she showed no other signs of life. The capture attempt was a catastrophe. I've reviewed the footage and transcripts enough times to know every second by heart. One agent approached to place the restraints. The Surgeon spoke to him quietly. Not a command, not a threat, just a sentence. The agent halted, turned back toward the team, and after a moment of hesitation raised his rifle and pulled the trigger. The Surgeon grabbed a rag soaked in the victim's blood and thrust it into the face of another agent. Blinded, she stumbled and fired wildly, hitting two of her own teammates before crashing to the floor. Containment was achieved only after repeated anesthesia darts, restraint nets, and overwhelming force. Even then, it felt less like a victory and more like he had allowed it. The tapes of when the Surgeon was brought in are difficult to watch. He was so polite, cooperative, almost eager to talk. I still remember them to this day, more clearly than I'd like. "So, do you have a name?" asked Dr. Otto, with a tremor in his voice that could match an earthquake, his hands shaking as he held the pen. "If I did, it is long forgotten to me, Doctor." The Surgeon replied with a remorseful smile. "Right, well, we've been following you since the late 19th century. No name? Can you explain how you're still around?" "Certainly, Doctor." He leaned back in his chair as he looked around. "I learned at a very young age that life is precious. So precious, in fact, that it can be guarded, taken, and traded." "What do you mean by that?" "Well, I found that if I play the right tendons like a violin and drum the right organs, I can move life from someone to another." "So you're stealing their life?" "Oh, Doctor, you make me sound so savage. I perform symphonies of life that only I can hear. He was looking directly in Dr. Otto's eyes as he said this. He leaned forward, eyes bright with something like joy. Right, well, tell me, why were they all women? Dr. Otto shifted slightly in his chair, averting the surgeon's gaze. They are life-givers, Doctor. Pure life. He cackled as the words danced out of his mouth. The tape continued in a similar vein. With the surgeon being open, some of the staff had an issue with it, saying he was too open. Hindsight is 20/20. They were right. 2 days ago I was sitting with him in his cell, blackjack on the table between us, and a pile of cigarettes on his side and a much smaller pile on mine. Hit or stand? I asked, eyeing the pitiful amount of wager I had to give. John, it's an 8. Of course I hit. His laughter coated his words like honey, as I pulled a card and placed it on his side. A 10. Now's the moment of truth. My gut swirled and tensed. Hit or stand? He sat in his chair, stroking his mangy beard. His eyes focused so hard on the deck of cards by my side, I thought he was somehow reading the cards. Hit. The confidence in his voice sent a small shiver down my spine. I slowly drew a card and placed an 11 down. He cheered as I flipped my own card to reveal a whopping total of 19. Good game, I said begrudgingly, as I slid my last cigarette over to him. We switched from money long ago, ever since I had to pay for my little girl's medical bills. I just told him we used the cigarette because of immediate gratification. Indeed, my good sir. He took a cigarette and lit it up, the smoke dancing in the manufactured light of the fluorescent bulbs. He took a long drag as I packed up the cards and then offered me a hit. You know, John, I have not left my cell in, 9 months, I think. Correct. You get 1 day a year. You know this. I waved the cigarette away as I finished putting the cards in their box. Yes, I know. Prisoner safety and such. But John, all the other prisoners are in bed by now, and my legs are aching so much. I give you my word that I merely wish to walk the grounds and stretch, free of the shackles. He looked me right in the eye as he pleaded. It appears to us that the surgeon has never lied. It's one of the more fascinating things about him. He has the ability to do so many things, but seemingly not deceive. He confessed to murders we never found, breaking our rules, even escape plans, all because he got asked. Surgeon, you know, I began. My medicine, John. He cut me off. I never said how I make it, or even what it is. If you let me have this walk, I shall reveal it to you. A soft smile sat on his face. Fine, I sighed as I unlocked his shackles. You won't tell anyone I did this. 1 trip around the block, but I'm accompanying you. Understand? John, he laughed. But yes, I understand. Don't worry. Hands in front of me the whole time, walking 6 feet ahead of you. We began the journey, slowly tracing the block in tandem. He swayed as he walked, roaming from area to area with seemingly no pattern at all. We spoke intermittently about various things. All of them were meaningless chatter, but one was important. John, how is your daughter doing? I know her illness is a rare one. His voice casual, as if it were something we'd spoken about many times. How do you know about her? The words tore out of me. I tasted copper and hospital lights in my mouth. It is my duty, given by the goddess, to know the well-being of all your kind. He stared at a wall while walking and talking. I can see it all, John. The beating of your fragile hearts, the rushing of your oxygenated blood, the stretching of your worn muscles. You call me the surgeon, and you are right. I am a physician of sorts, perhaps a mortician, an apothecary. Who truly knows? Why would you ask about her? My hand was slowly reaching towards my radio, ready to press the panic button. Do not call for help, John. There is no need. I am not going to hurt you. He smiled as he looked around. I froze, my thumb hovering over the red button. His smile was too calm, too knowing. What? Before another word could escape, I felt my neck freezing, my joints locked in place. I managed to look down and see that red, thick liquid splattered across my chest. I do not make the medicine, John, he cooed as he stared at me. I pull it out of you. Blood is a wonderful thing. It can control your whole existence. My movements became more restricted. I felt my skin tightening until I couldn't even blink. I could feel the signals from my brain, firing at full power, telling my body to move, but nothing happened. I could feel the tendons and joints eagerly awaiting orders, trying to move on their own, but nothing happened. A faint groan escaped my clenched jaw. Oh, John, he tutted. It is okay. I am just going to stretch my legs. Do not worry. I am a man of my word. I will not make you experience pain. He slowly paced around my frozen body. Those Draugr you have in Bay 4 are lovely fellows. He let out a grin unlike any other I've seen, far too wide with dead eyes. Do you want to see a secret they showed me? He chuckled as I saw him begin to blur, as if he was vibrating on the spot at the speed of sound. His laugh became distant, and in an instant he was gone. After hours of waiting, I could move again. Then, after even more hours of debriefing, I could move freely again. Hours of alarms, questioning, lockdowns, and field teams being deployed. I told them to not contain him again. Kill him. On my way out of my commander's office, he called out to me. John, wait a moment. He barked with an authoritative gravitas. There's something I don't understand. Off record, of course. I turned around and saw him kill the power to the recording device. What's that, sir? My eyes averted his gaze as I turned around. The surgeon mentioned your daughter. We've had him marked as an ontological threat, but I can't get over that final line from him. What if he's an ego threat? Why does it have to be one or the other? I muttered as I left. I then realized that we had spent so much time categorizing these creatures, we didn't consider the possibility that they can merge and blur the lines between black and white. That suggestion brought about even more chaos. An ontology threat can rewrite time and space. An ego threat can rewrite humans. It doesn't touch reality at all. It touches us. Whatever part of you thinks it's still you, as far as I knew, ego threats were theoretical, but now I'm wondering otherwise. Before today, I wouldn't have even considered that blood magic he did to exist, but now I'm researching our archives, Babylonian and Canaanite cultures using blood rituals. Paracelsus and Agrippa considering blood for alchemy. Hemomancy throughout history. Earlier today I was filing through files, and I got a small paper cut. I instinctively brought it to my mouth and sucked on the wound, but what I tasted wasn't blood. It tasted like curdled milk covering rotten eggs. I drew my finger away, holding back a gag, and I saw the substance trickling down my index finger. As soon as it made contact, I felt that locking sensation again. My fingers refused to obey my mind's command to bend. One of the facility doctors confirmed through many blood tests. They all show barely any hemoglobin and so much of that syrupy substance. Yet somehow my vital signs remained inexplicably normal. My blood in his medicine. Tomorrow I'm getting locked up as a new type of creature in this prison of ours. I've been given 1 day to get my affairs in order. The surgeon wears the shape of a man, around 184 centimeters tall. With black hair and pale skin, he has one green eye and one brown eye. His voice is soft, almost kind and patient, with a faint British sound. If you see him out there, run. I've told you what I can. The rest, I've changed. For your safety. And mine. Me and my girlfriend went on a getaway, although it wasn't her in that cabin with me. So, my story begins with me and my girlfriend planning a little getaway. We had been thinking about it for a while and decided it was finally time. With both of our jobs becoming stressful and general life struggles, we took some of our savings and put it into a long weekend stay in the Lake District, Friday to Monday. The day before we were planning to leave, I noticed my girlfriend wasn't feeling the best. She said it was nothing physical, just a feeling she had. The way she described it, I can only see as nervousness, or even dread. I offered to postpone or even cancel altogether, but she insisted we go anyway. So, off we went. On arrival to the small cabin, about 5 p.m., I immediately noticed a change in Emma. She had spoken less and less the closer we got, but was whispering things under her breath. She had not even made any comments about the place as we entered and looked around. The closest neighbor was at least a mile away, on the other side of the lake, just outside our cabin, which I did purposefully for her. She deals with a lot of stupid people in her job, and thought being fully away from them would be ideal, but still no comments. As the evening went on, we made some dinner. I tried my best to spark up some conversations, but still not a lot from Emma. I put that up to her not feeling great, and the long day we had. I plated up our food and took it into the living room, so we could eat by the fire. As I set the plates down, I noticed I didn't hear her behind me anymore. She was walking right behind me a second ago, carrying our drinks. I turned to the hallway leading to the kitchen, but was just met with darkness. Where could she have gone? "Babe?" I called out, hoping I'd get a little response of, "Just forgot my phone in the kitchen," or something that would have made her change direction suddenly without mentioning it. But nothing. Just eerie silence with the occasional crackling of the fire. It wasn't a big deal, so I just sat down and began browsing for something for us to watch while we ate. It must have been 5 minutes since I called for her, and still not a single sound in the whole house. I called her name again, but still nothing. I listened intently, for a door to close, a toilet to flush, anything, until I heard a slow and deliberate creaking of a floorboard, just behind the sofa where I was sat. There was no way she could have gotten to that spot. She would have had to come from the corridor on my right leading to the kitchen. She would have to walk right by me to get to the hallway to the bedroom, which was directly behind me. I switched the TV off out of impulse to try and hear better, and then I froze. In the TV reflection, I saw my girlfriend, her hair dripping wet, clothes torn and drenched, and she was smiling, less than a foot behind my back. I jumped up and turned around, but no one was there. Not my girlfriend, not a puddle on the floor like I expected, but more creaking. Like she was stood right there, but I just couldn't see her. I stared intently down the hallway to the bedroom, not taking my eyes off of it, hopeful I would hear another creak to locate who or whatever that was I just saw. "Hey babe, are you okay?" A voice came from my left. I screamed and jolted backwards, almost knocking the food off the table. "Whoa, what's up? You look like you've seen a ghost," my girlfriend said to me with a small laugh. "Where did you come from?" "I had to pee. Is that okay with you?" she said sarcastically. I tried to slow my breathing as I sat down next to my now concerned girlfriend. "What happened?" "I thought I saw someone in the reflection." "Are you sure? Maybe it was just the coat rack next to the door. How many wines have you had again? I was reluctant to just dismiss it like that, but I agreed. Maybe my brain was making me see things just because I felt a bit creeped out. I just wanted this weird moment to be over. We sat and watched TV, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, and every so often I heard the faintest dripping sound. The sound of water hitting wooden floorboards right behind me. We were getting ready for bed that night, and to be honest, I was still a little freaked out. I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't really know how to say, "Hey babe, why was you being a creepy shit in the TV reflection and then teleported?" So I didn't mention it again. I've always very much believed in ghosts and the paranormal, but Emma, not so much. So I didn't want to be dismissed or even laughed at, because it did sound insane. The night was fairly uneventful, a couple of sounds in the dark house that could have been explained away, so nothing to worry about. Maybe I truly didn't see what I thought I did earlier that evening, and this cabin wasn't haunted. With that, I closed my eyes and slept. I dreamt vividly about the lake, me and my girlfriend having a picnic right next to it. The sun was shining, birds chirping, a seemingly beautiful scene. We both stood up and ran up to the water's edge. I looked down, amused at the ripples in the water making us both look strange. Then the water calmed, and I focused on my girlfriend's reflection. In it, she was smiling, unnervingly wide, and her head rotated to stare at me, though her body remained forward. I pulled my gaze to her face quickly, and she was just peacefully looking out across the horizon, the complete opposite to what I had just seen. I woke up immediately and looked over at my girlfriend to find her sleeping, the same rhythm of snores as usual. I let out a deep breath and tried to go back to sleep, hoping for less messed up dreams this time, please. The next day, it was as if nothing even happened. Me and Emma had a day of walking, laughing, and just enjoying our time. There was a couple of times I would find her just staring off, whispering under her breath, but when I spoke to her, or when she felt me watching her, she was her usual self. In the evening, however, I don't know where my girlfriend went and what was in her place. We cooked, ate dinner, watched some TV, showered, and got into bed. Nothing out of the ordinary, until it came time to sleep. Emma was already rolled over on her side, and her breathing started to become her soft snores. But I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Just a gut feeling telling me I shouldn't sleep, that it wasn't safe. I don't know what made me do this, but I decided to go to the living room for an hour or so and read. In the dark, by myself. I don't claim to be the smartest, but even I know this was a bit weird of me to do. But before I even know it, I was downstairs, drink in hand and starting to open my book. I sat in the big brown armchair, which was backed on the same wall as the TV in the living room, which meant it was facing the bedroom corridor, with the hallway to the kitchen on my left. However, when I was reading, the book was covering most of my vision. I must have been reading for about 15 minutes when I first heard it, a sharp and quick "hey" in my left ear. Immediately I slammed my book down, scanning the area. The room wasn't exactly well lit, but it was illuminated by a small lamp next to me. The warm light didn't reach to the end of the hallways, but that didn't matter, because the voice must have been centimeters from my ear. I was a bit cautious, but ultimately, I ignored it. I was tired. I assumed it was a similar situation to when you have headphones on, and all of a sudden someone is calling your name. That must have been it. I was simply so engrossed in my book, I thought I heard something. I got back to reading, and the same again. Maybe 15 minutes later, another sharp and quick "hey" to my right ear this time. Again I react quick and look around. I think I see something just out of view going down the corridor. I whisper my girlfriend's name just in case it was her, but had no response. I listened for a second more and decided to just go to bed. As I was putting my book away and moving the blanket off me, I heard another slightly louder and angrier "hey." This time there was no mistaking if I had just been too into the book and imagined it. That was a real voice in my ear. I even felt the breath against my skin. It was cold and smelt rotted. I turned that way, expecting to see someone, an intruder maybe, or even my girlfriend playing a weird joke, which is incredibly unlike her. But I once again was met with nothing, an empty, dimly lit space. I picked up my pace to the bedroom. It wasn't much safer in there, but at least I wasn't alone. I almost made it to the bedroom when I dared to look back. I wish I hadn't. As I turned, I saw something shuffle behind a curtain to try to make itself out of sight. I don't miss the long auburn hair that snaked behind the curtain with them. I almost laughed. It was Emma. Of course it was. She was trying to scare me, probably trying to get me back with that one time I jumped out on her. I went to open the bedroom door so I could fake shut it and sneak up on her behind the curtain, but before I even had the chance, I saw something in the corner of my eye. It was my girlfriend, sleeping in the same position and rhythm she had been. My world stopped. What on earth was behind the curtain? I went into the bedroom and shut the door behind me, locking it while I tried to come up with a plan. This woke up Emma, and once I explained what I had seen, she motioned to a baseball bat by the door, and we checked. Of course, we found nothing, and once again, I was convinced I watched too many horror films. Emma was tired and didn't believe I had seen anything, so we got into bed, and I managed to eventually fall asleep, with one arm out of the bed, clutching the baseball bat. That night, sleep was rough. It was plagued with vivid dreams and nightmares, all flashing across my brain, all being too nonsensical to have any meaning. Apart from one, we are in bed. In my dream, I had just woken up and Emma isn't beside me. I pull on my slippers and I go searching for her. I hear scratching along the wall and I follow the noise. I go and find Emma, or what is trying to be her, crouched in the corner, cracking coming from her body, and she twists and turns. I put my hand on her shoulder and she turns, immediately plunging a knife into my side. Her smile doesn't waver and it seems to grow. I look up at her as I fall to the floor, clutching my side. I see her whisper, "Don't get out of bed." Then I woke up and it was morning. The next morning, I felt groggy, unrested, and frankly a little annoyed. I would never dismiss Emma's fears, and yet that's what she did to me. So through breakfast I didn't speak, with nothing to say as all my thoughts were filled with what I have seen. I can tell this upset Emma, and I felt guilty, but this was just how it had to be for a while. A few hours later, Emma told me she had a surprise. I followed her out of the cabin to a picnic set just on the edge of the lake. It made me smile. There's my Emma, smiling sweetly with the sun on her cheeks. We sat down and ate. We chatted, and it seemed a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I don't know what had been causing these dreams and maybe hallucinations, but I would make an appointment for when we got back. We sat there for a while, and then what seemed to be many flies, coming close to Emma's head, circling her. She tried to ignore it and wave them away, but ran off with a small giggle. It was a little odd with how many there were, but I laughed and ran after her until we both ended standing right along the water line. She brushed the leaves off of her, and they fell into the water, creating a ripple. I glanced down and was amused by how the rippling made us look strange, and then it hit me. My dream. This is exactly how it went. My memory was hazy with what happened next. It felt like weird déjà vu, but laced with dread. As the water calmed, I looked up at my girlfriend, admiring how beautiful she was while looking out and gazing at the scenery. I smiled to myself at how lucky I am and glanced down. The smile on my face was immediately ripped off when I saw the horror in the reflection. Emma had that twisted, gaping smile with her head cranked toward me. I let out a sound of terror and walked backward until that thing was no longer in view. I spun on my heel and sprinted back into the house, desperate to be away from Emma and whatever was pretending to be her, not knowing which was real. Of course, my girlfriend came after me and tried to calm me down. I could barely get my words out before I saw her eye roll. I was starting to have enough of it. I stated firmly I wanted to leave immediately, but was met with reasons why this is important to her and we need this break. I tried to speak my case, but was told it wasn't real, and maybe just a coincidence. I was starting to believe her when I looked down and noticed my girlfriend's nails were going black and looked dead, her hair dry and breaking off, the opposite of how she usually cares for it. She looked different, but the same, like a twin, but who had been in the dark her whole life. I knew we needed to get out of here and fast, but I couldn't convince her. I was worried whatever had taken up residence in my girlfriend would act out, hurt her, so I comprised on the next morning. Just had to get through one more night. I went to bed scared for my girlfriend and very scared of her. I know she was still in there, so I tried to be patient and get us out of here as soon as I could without triggering anything. Slowly, through exhaustion, I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly as if someone had thrown water over me, to find Emma not next to me. Maybe she was thirsty or went to get something to eat. She hasn't eaten much since we've been here. I stood up to go and find her to make sure she was okay. As I bent down to put on my slippers, I thought about earlier that day, how uncanny it had been. There was no way it was just a coincidence. I had the exact dream and then it came true. I'm not sure what that meant, but it freaked me out. A thought flashed through my mind of a dream I had the night before. I froze. It came flooding back to me. Me waking up and finding Emma gone, searching for her, the scratching, her crouching, and then the knife. The memory hit me like a brick and I almost went dizzy. I reluctantly stood up, went to the door and twisted the handle. There's no way this is happening. My dreams aren't coming true, are they? That's impossible. But it did happen. Only once, maybe not this time. But I had to make sure my Emma was okay. I took a couple steps down the hallway, my breathing shallow and rapid, repeating to myself that it can't be real. I turned the corner and heard a faint noise. I strained to hear, but it got louder and louder, and then it was unmistakable. It was scratching.